Every maid who worked in the Choi house left within 30 days. Some left crying. Some left with money in their hand and a warning in their ear. One of them left in a black bag, and nobody in that house ever said her name again. Sandra Darko lasted 411 days. And on the last one, the most feared man in Seoul went down on his knees on a kitchen floor in front of a woman holding a plastic bag with everything she owned inside it, and he asked her not to go. Nobody had ever seen him kneel. Not his enemies. Not his father. Not the men who begged him in rooms that had no windows. He was still wearing the suit he had killed a man in that morning. The kitchen was quiet. The tap was dripping. Her bag was by the door, and her hand was already on the handle, and she did not turn around. Because she believed, at that exact moment, that this man had murdered her sister. Before I tell you how she found out the truth, let me tell you where it started. And I need you to hold one thing in your head the whole way through, because everything in this story depends on it. He knew who she was the day she walked in. Welcome to Afro Korean Stories Empire. If this is your first time here, come closer. This is where we tell the love stories that are too complicated for anybody else. The ones with blood in them and tenderness in them, and people who should never have found each other and did anyway. Subscribe so you never miss one, because these stories stay with you long after the video ends. Now, let me take you back to the morning it began. Sandra Darko arrived at the Choi estate on a Tuesday in March, carrying one bag and a lie. The lie was on paper, a name on an agency file, a work history that belonged to a woman in Busan, and a stamp that had cost her 3 months of savings. She had practiced her answers on the plane until the words felt like they belonged to somebody else. She was not a maid. She had been an assistant manager at a hotel in Accra for 4 years, and she had been good at it. She was here because 6 months earlier, a letter had arrived at her mother's house saying her sister had gone home. Josephine Darko had worked in that house for 2 years. She wrote every Sunday. She sent money on the first of the month. And then one Sunday, there was no letter, and the month after that there was a letter from an office nobody could find, saying Josephine had left of her own accord and gone back to Ghana. Josephine never arrived in Ghana. She never arrived anywhere. So Sandra sold what she had, borrowed what she could, told her mother she had found work abroad, and walked up to a gate in Seoul with her sister's photograph folded flat inside her left shoe. The wall around the Choi estate was higher than the trees behind it. There were no cameras that you could see, which meant there were more of them than you could count. The gate opened before she pressed anything. Somebody had been watching her walk the whole way up. Madame Huang was waiting in the courtyard with her hands folded. She was a small woman with a hard gray bun and a ring of keys at her hip that jangled before she came around corners, so that in that house you always heard her arriving 3 seconds before she arrived. She looked at Sandra for a long moment. She looked at her shoes. She looked at her waist. She looked at her face last. "You are bigger than the file said." Sandra did not answer. That is not a compliment, and it is not an insult. It is a measurement. Doorways here are narrow and the stairs are steep, and I do not have time to schedule around anyone. "I keep up," Sandra said. Madame Huang almost smiled. They all say that. Inside, the house did not feel like a home. It felt like a museum where somebody happened to sleep. Stone floors. Ceilings too high for the sound of a human voice. Long corridors with wooden doors that were all closed, and Sandra counted them without seeming to count them, the way you count exits in a place you do not trust. There were 11 maids. There should have been 14. Nobody explained the gap. Madame Huang delivered the rules while walking, and she walked fast. Staff use the back stairs. Staff do not use the main hall between 6 and 9 in the evening. Staff do not speak first. Staff do not look at the chairman. And staff do not, under any circumstance, enter the East Wing office when the door is shut. "And the chairman's son?" Sandra asked. Madame Huang stopped walking. For a second, something moved across that hard little face, and it was gone before it finished. She started walking again. "Mr. Choi does not need rules," she said. "Mr. Choi is the rule." That night, in a room with 3 narrow beds and 1 window that did not open, a 19-year-old kitchen maid named Sora sat cross-legged on the mattress opposite and told Sandra the only thing that mattered. 30 days, Sora said. "That is the record. Since I came, nobody has beaten it." "Beaten what?" "Him." Sora pulled her knees up. "He does not shout. I want you to understand that first, because everybody expects shouting. He never shouts. He comes into a room, and he looks at the floor you had just cleaned, and he tells you, very quietly, exactly what is wrong with you. Not the floor. You. And it is always true. That is the part nobody is ready for. He finds the one true thing about you that you have been hiding from yourself, and he says it out loud in a normal voice, and then he leaves. Sandra sat very still. How long did the last girl last? 9 days. And the one before? Sora looked at the door before she answered, which told Sandra everything about that house. There was a girl before, she said. African girl. Tall. She used to laugh so loud in the kitchen that Madame Huang would come running. Sandra's hands did not move. Her voice did not change. She had rehearsed this on the plane too. What happened to her? She went home, Sora said. That is what they told us. Sandra lay awake until 3 in the morning listening to a house settle around her, and she thought about the way her sister laughed, and she made herself a promise she intended to keep no matter what it cost. She would not last 30 days. She would last as long as it took. 3 days later, she saw Choi Jean for the first time, and it was not the way anybody expects to meet the man they're going to love. She was carrying a tray of water glasses to the east wing because a maid had called in sick and Madame Huang was 3 rooms away and out of options. She had been told to knock, leave the tray on the console table outside, and go. The door was already open. There were 4 men inside. 3 of them were sitting. One of them was standing in the middle of the room with his hands at his sides, and he was sweating through a very expensive shirt. And there was a man behind the desk who was not doing anything at all. He was not leaning forward. He was not frowning. He had a fountain pen in his hand, and he was turning it over slowly, end over end, and he was listening to the standing man explain about some money that had gone missing from a shipping account, and he was letting the man finish. That was the part Sandra would think about later, for months. He let him finish. The man talked for 4 minutes. He explained about a bank in Incheon and a delay and a transfer and a cousin who had made an error, and somewhere around the 3rd minute his voice found some confidence, because nobody had interrupted him, and when nobody interrupts you, you start to believe you are being understood. Sandra stood in the doorway with the tray, and she could not move, because leaving would make a sound. The man finished. The room stayed quiet. Then Choi Jean set the pen down, lined it up perfectly with the edge of the desk, and said, in a voice he would use to ask someone to close a window, your watch. The man stopped breathing. Then he laughed, once, the way people laugh when they are hoping it is a joke. Sir, your watch. Take it off. The man took his watch off. His hand was shaking so hard he could not work the clasp, and it took him a long time, and nobody in that room helped him or looked away. He put it on the desk. Choi Jean picked it up, turned it over, and looked at the back of it for a moment, the way a man reads a name he already knows. My father gave you this in 2011, he said. For 11 years of good work. You have had a good run. He put the watch in his own pocket. Be out of the city before the sun comes up. Do not go to your brother's house. Do not stop at the office. Do not call anyone from your own phone. If you're still in Seoul at 7 in the morning, that will not be my decision anymore. It will be Uncle Nam's, and Uncle Nam is not as patient as I am. The man's mouth opened. Thank you, Choi Jean said, for explaining. Close the door on your way out. The man left. He walked past Sandra in the doorway, and he did not see her at all, and he was crying without any sound coming out, the way grown men cry when they have just understood something. And inside the room, the meeting continued. Somebody asked about a delivery schedule. Somebody else answered. A chair scraped. It was as ordinary as a Tuesday. Sandra stepped forward and set the tray down on the side table with hands she was proud of, because they did not shake, and she turned to go. Wait. Everything in her went cold. She turned around. Choi Jean was looking at her, and it was the first time, and she understood immediately why nobody in that house ever finished a sentence about him. He did not look at her the way men looked at her. There was no assessment in it. There was no pity, and there was no appetite. He looked at her the way you look at a door you have been expecting somebody to walk through. You are the new one, he said. Yes, sir. How long have you been here? 3 days, sir. He nodded slowly. He turned his watch on his wrist with his thumb, once. 3 days, he said. We will see. And that was all. He went back to his papers. She left. She got all the way down the back stairs and into the pantry before her legs let her down, and she put both hands flat on the counter and breathed, and she told herself that the shaking was fear. It was fear. It was mostly fear. But there had been something in the way he said we will see that did not sound like a threat, and she would spend the next 400 days trying to work out what it was. The breaking started on day 4. She was on her knees in the main hall with a cloth, working the seam where the stone floor met the wall, and she heard him before she saw him, which almost never happened with him. He stopped about 2 feet away. She kept working. Stand up. She stood. He looked at the floor. Then he looked at the cloth in her hand. Then he looked at her, and he spoke in that same flat, unhurried, almost gentle voice. You work hard so that nobody can say anything about you, he said. You have done that your whole life. You are the first one up and the last one to sit down, and you think that if the work is perfect, people will stop noticing the rest of you. It does not work. You know it does not work. You have known since you were a girl, and you keep doing it anyway, because you do not know what else to be. The hall was very quiet. 2 other maids had stopped moving near the stairs. The floor is clean, he said. Do it again. And he walked away. Sandra got back down on her knees. She did the floor again. Her face did not change once, not while he was there and not after. And that night in the pantry, she ate a bowl of rice standing up in the dark, fast, alone, the way she had eaten for 6 years. That was the first time. It was not the last. He sent her food back untouched twice in 1 week. He stood behind her in a doorway and said nothing at all for 11 seconds, which was worse than anything he could have said. He told her, once, in front of Madame Huang, that she moved like a woman apologizing for taking up room, and that he found it exhausting to watch. Every single thing he said was true. That was the horror of it. He had a talent for finding the sentence you had already said to yourself at 2 in the morning, and repeating it back to you in daylight, in a normal voice, with nothing on his face. On day 9, one of the other girls packed. On day 12, another one. Madame Huang had a new file open before the beds were cold. And Sandra Darko stayed. She stayed because she had not come for a job. She stayed because there was a photograph folded flat in her left shoe, and every insult that landed on her was just a bill she had agreed to pay before she got on the plane. But on day 15, something happened that she did not have a shoe or a photograph or a plan for. She was in the linen room at the end of the west corridor, counting sheets, and Sora came in and shut the door behind her and stood against it. Sora had been crying. Not recently. Hours ago. And then she had washed her face and put her apron back on and gone back to work, which is a thing that girls in houses like that learn to do before they are 20. There's a man who comes on Thursdays, Sora said. Sandra put the sheets down. He does the accounts for the garden and the cars. He has been coming for 4 years. Sora's hands were flat against the door behind her. He waits at the bottom of the west stairs. He knows what time we finish. Did he touch you? Sora did not answer, which was the answer. Tell Madame Huang. I did. Sora laughed, and it was an awful sound in a girl that age. She said I should not use those stairs. Sandra stood in that linen room and felt something arrive in her chest that she had been managing very carefully for 15 days, and it was not fear anymore, and it was going to make everything harder. Because she had come to Seoul for a dead woman. She had built her entire plan around a dead woman, and a dead woman cannot be hurt any further, which meant Sandra could take her time. Sora was 19 and alive and being hunted on a staircase every Thursday at 9:30. You cannot take your time with that. She could not go to the police because her papers were forged and her name was not her name. She could not go to Madame Huang, who had already answered. She could not go to the chairman, who did not know the staff existed. There was one person in that house who could stop a man from standing at the bottom of a staircase. And she had watched him take a man's watch in his city away from him in under 90 seconds, in a normal voice, without ever standing up. Sandra spent 2 nights deciding. Then she went and stood outside the East Wing office at 11 at night with a cup of tea nobody had asked for. And when he said come in, she came in and she set it down, and she did not leave. He looked at the tea. He looked at her. Say it. There's a man who comes on Thursdays, she said. He waits for Sora at the bottom of the west stairs. Choi Jean did not move at all. That was the thing about him. Other men lean in. He went stiller. What is his name? I do not know his name. He does the accounts for the garden and the cars. How long? She did not say. For years, he has been coming. He nodded once, slowly, and then he said the only other thing he said in that entire conversation. Use the back stairs. Both of you. From tonight. She said, yes, sir. And she picked up the empty tray, and she went to the door, and behind her, in that flat, unhurried voice, he said one more thing after all. You should not have had to come in here to ask. She did not sleep that night. She told herself she had just handed a 19-year-old girl to a monster and called it protection. She was wrong about which part of that sentence was the problem. But something else was happening in that house, and she did not see it. And I'm going to show it to you now because I need you to carry it with you for the rest of this story. The night before Sandra Darko arrived, Choi Jean sat in his car outside the gate with her agency file open on his knee. Driver Han was in the front seat, not asking. The file said her name was somebody else. The photograph clipped to the corner was 6 months old, taken for a visa, and in it she was not smiling. Choi Jean looked at that photograph for a long time. Then he opened his own jacket and took out a different picture. Older, softer. 2 women outside a house in Accra with a blue-rimmed enamel bowl between them. Both of them laughing, one of them tall with a gap in her front teeth. He held the 2 pictures side by side under the interior light. Same jaw, same eyes, same hands. He had taken that photograph out of a dead girl's room himself, 8 months earlier, before anybody else could go through her things. Sir, Han said finally. Hire her, Choi Jean said. Chairman will ask why we are taking another one from that agency. Then he will ask. He put both photographs away, put her on the East Wing rotation. And Han, nobody goes near her. Not Nam's people, not the kitchen, nobody. If somebody so much as changes her schedule, I want to know inside the hour. Han put the car in gear. And the door on the back stairs, Choi Jean said. The light is out. I will have it replaced. No, I will do it. So understand where we are now. She thought she was hunting him. She thought every corridor she walked down at night was a risk she was taking. She thought the man tearing her apart in the main hall was the thing standing between her and the truth about her sister. He had known her face before she got off the plane. He had put her where he could see her. And the man who actually killed Josephine Darko was sitting at that family's dinner table 3 nights a week, being called uncle. Now watch what happens next, because she is about to see him do something that makes all of it worse. It was a Thursday. She was clearing a tray from the sunroom, where Chairman Choi took his afternoon tea, and Choi Jean was standing at the window with a phone against his ear, talking about nothing. Shipping containers. A permit. The kind of conversation a man has with a lawyer. His phone buzzed against his ear. He looked at the screen. He said, hold on, to the lawyer, and switch calls. Sandra kept stacking cups. Slowly. He listened for maybe 4 seconds. Then he said 3 words. He said them the way you would confirm a lunch order. Yes, do it. He hung up. He switched back. He said, sorry, go on. And the lawyer went on, and the conversation about the permit continued for another 6 minutes. Sandra carried the tray out. There was a clock on the wall in the corridor, one of those old brass ones the chairman liked, and she looked at it without meaning to. 4:20. The next morning, Sora came into the pantry white in the face with a phone in her hand and said a man had been found in the river near the fish market, a man who used to come to the house, one of the ones who did the accounts. Sandra asked quietly when Sora scrolled. Sometime after 4:30 yesterday afternoon, they thought. And Sandra stood in that pantry and understood that she had watched it happen. She had been in the room. She had heard the entire thing. It had taken him 4 seconds, and it had cost him nothing, and afterwards he had said sorry, go on, and talked about a permit. That was the day she stopped telling herself she was in a dangerous house. She was in a dangerous house with one dangerous man in it, and she was cleaning his floors. So here's the part 1, need to tell you carefully, because this is where the story turns into something else. She came up the back stairs every evening at 7, because that was when the dinner service ended and the staff were released. Those stairs were stone, steep, and narrow, and the bulb over the top landing had been dead since before she arrived. For her first 11 days, she went up them in the dark with one hand on the wall, counting, because she had counted them on her second night the way she counted everything in that house. On the 12th day, the light was on. She stopped halfway up. She stood there with her hand on the cold wall and looked at a bare bulb burning over a doorway, and she felt something she had absolutely no name for. She asked Sora. Sora did not know. She asked Madame Huang, carefully, sideways, and Madame Huang said maintenance had not been in the house that week. And it stayed on. Every evening, 7 o'clock, that light was burning, and at 11 it was off again, and nobody in that house ever said a word about it. 3 weeks later she found out. She had gone down late for water, past midnight, and she came around the corner at the bottom of the stairs, and there was a man on a step stool with the panel open, and it was him. Jacket off, sleeves rolled, a screwdriver in one hand and his watch loose on the other wrist, and a burnout bulb balanced on the step beside his foot. The most feared man in Seoul, changing a light bulb at midnight on the staff stairs where nobody would ever see him do it. He heard her. He did not turn around. Neither of them said anything. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, and he stood on the step stool, and the whole house was asleep, and there was a silence that went on for maybe 4 full seconds, which does not sound like very much until you have stood inside one. Then he closed the panel, stepped down, picked up the dead bulb, and walked past her. And as he passed her, without stopping, without looking at her, in the same flat voice he used to end men's lives, he said, "The stairs are steep." That is all he said. He went up the corridor and the door closed, and she was alone in the dark by the pantry, and she put her hand over her mouth, and she stood there for a very long time. Because here is what she was thinking about. She was thinking about a man named Kofi who she gave 6 years to, who loved her in his car and edited her in restaurants, who used to say, "Baby, order first, so nobody is watching you decide," who had never once, in 6 years, done a single thing for her that he did not tell her about afterwards. And upstairs, there was a man who had put a light on for her every night for a month and would have gone the rest of his life without mentioning it. That is the moment. That is the one. If you have ever had somebody do something small for you that they never claimed credit for, you know exactly what she was feeling at the bottom of those stairs, and you know exactly how dangerous it was. Because she had also stood in a sunroom and heard him say, "Yes, do it." Both of those men were the same man. She was going to have to hold both of them in her head at once for a very long time. After that, she started noticing things she had been too frightened to notice before. That he never sent her food back on Sunday, which was the day she posted her parcel home to Accra. That when the household drank tea, hers came without sugar, and she had said that out loud exactly once in a corridor to Sora 6 weeks earlier. That in a meeting she was serving, a man from the shipping side made a joke about the size of the new girl, and Choi did not react at all, and 11 days later that man was not on the shipping side anymore. That he'd asked her once what her mother's village was called. She had told him. He never mentioned it again. But when the chairman's doctor came to the house that winter, Sandra was called in and told that medication questions for a woman in Accra had already been answered and the prescription had already been sent, and nobody could tell her who had authorized it. She stopped sleeping properly. Because there was a version of this where she was the stupidest woman alive, being softened by a monster who had killed her sister. And there was a version where she was missing something enormous. She found out which one on a Tuesday in January at 2 in the morning in the East Wing office with the door shut. She had waited 400 days for that room. Madame Huang had shingles. The house was thin. The alarm on the East Wing had been off since the electrician came. She went in with a torch and her heart going like a fist on a door, and she went straight for the drawer she had watched him lock 100 times. She was looking for shipping records. She was looking for a payment, a bank name, anything with Josephine's real name on it. What she found was a notebook, not a ledger of money, a ledger of women. 14 names, in his handwriting, going back to the previous March. Beside each name, a date of arrival. Beside that, a date of departure. And beside that, a number. 9, 12, 6, 22, 8 days. And under the last entry, her own name, written the day before she arrived, with no departure date and no number, and one line underneath it in ink that had been gone over twice. The way you write something you are angry at yourself about. She will not break. Find another way. She sat down on the floor of that office. Because she was doing the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was very simple. 14 women. Every single one of them broken quickly and sent home. Every single one of them still alive. And the first name on that list arrived in the March after Josephine Darko disappeared. He had not been tormenting maids. He had been emptying the house. He could not prove who killed her sister. The man who did it was his father's sworn brother, 40 years of loyalty, a man who buried body for the chairman before Choi was born. Proof meant war inside the family, and war meant an old man with a bad heart in the middle of it. So he did the only thing a man with power and no proof could do. He made that house unlivable. He made himself into something no girl would stay near. He broke 14 women's confidence to make certain that not one of them stayed long enough to see what Josephine saw. He became a monster so that nobody else would have to die. And the man in the East Wing. The one who talked for 4 minutes about a bank in Incheon while Choi let him finish. The one who lost a watch in a city. He was the driver. He was the one who moved her sister's body. Sandra Darko sat on that floor with a notebook in her hands, and cried without making any sound, because every cruel thing that man had ever said to her had been him trying to save her life. I need you to pause here for a second. Just a second. If this story is doing something to you right now, tap subscribe and send this to the one person you know who lived for a love that had to survive something. Your sister, your best friend, the person you were thinking about during the light on the stairs. And type I am enjoying IT in the comments. So I know you are still with me, because what happens next is the part one I've been waiting to tell you. Now stay close. She did not confront him. She was smarter than that. She went to Chairman Choi. She waited until the old man was alone in the sunroom, and she put the tea down, and she did not leave. And when he looked up at her with those flat, unimpressed eyes, she said one sentence. Sir, your son has been protecting your house from your brother for a year, and it is going to kill him. And she put the notebook on the table. What happened over the next 9 days is the reason I told you this story. Chairman Choi did not believe her. Understand what she had walked in and said. She had told a 79-year-old man that his brother of 40 years, the man who carried him out of a burning building in 1987, the man who stood beside him at both his wife's funerals, had killed a housemaid and let his son take the weight for it. And she had said it in a house uniform, in a language that was not her first, with a notebook she had stolen out of a locked drawer. He had her put in a room on the ground floor with a man outside the door for 2 days. She was not frightened. That is what she said afterwards, and I believe her. She had already decided on the plane 6 months earlier that she was probably not going home, and a woman who has made her peace with that is very difficult to hold in a room. On the second day, the old man came in himself and sat down opposite her and asked her one question. Why would my son protect the man who killed your sister? He is not protecting the man, Sandra said. He is protecting you. And that is the sentence that did it. Not the notebook. Not the dates. That one sentence. Because Chairman Choi had spent a year watching his son become somebody he did not recognize. And he had told himself it was the business hardening him. And he had been proud of it. And he had never once considered the other explanation. He had his own man go into the records. Not Nam's people. His own. It took 6 more days. They found a payment to an agency in Busan for a file that no longer existed. They found a phone that had called a number near the fish market at 10 past 11 on a night in March. And it was not Choi Jin's phone, and the old man had known that number since 1985. And they found the transfer that had paid a driver in Incheon $11,000 for a job in March from an account Uncle Nam had opened in the chairman's own name. On the 9th day, he called Uncle Nam into his study and closed the door. Uncle Nam did not deny it. That is what made him what he was. He stood in front of the man he had given his life to, and he explained, patiently, warmly, that the African girl had been in the wrong room on the wrong night and had seen a page she should not have seen, and that he had done what needed doing, the way he had always done what needed doing for 40 years without ever once being thanked. And then he said the thing that mattered. He said, your son would not have done it. That is the problem. Your son is soft, and this house will be gone in 5 years. Chairman Choi stripped him of everything in 11 minutes. And it was over. That is what it felt like. It felt over. Sandra stood in the kitchen that night with Sora and let out a breath she had been holding since March. Josephine had a name again. The man who did it was finished. Choi Jin came through the kitchen and did not say anything to her, but he stopped in the doorway for a moment, and he turned his watch on his wrist with his thumb, and something in his face was almost open. For hours later, Chairman Choi's heart stopped in his study. He was 79, and he had a bad heart, and there were 3 doctors who would say it was his heart. And before the sun came up, Uncle Nam was standing in the main hall with the old man's men around him, holding a phone and playing a recording. It was Choi Jin's voice. There was no question that it was his voice. Yes, do it. 3 words and a timestamp. And Nam standing in that hall explaining gently to a room full of grieving men that this was the order that had killed a Ghanaian maid in March. And that this boy had been building a story about his uncle ever since to cover it, and that he had brought the dead girl's own sister into this house to sell her the lie. Sandra was on the stairs. She heard all of it. And here is the terrible thing. She had been in that room. She had heard him say those exact 3 words in that exact voice in the sunroom on a Thursday. She had watched a man be killed with 4 seconds and a permit conversation. She believed it. She packed her bag in 11 minutes. And that is where this story started. If you remember, a kitchen at 2 in the afternoon, a dripping tap, a plastic bag by the door with everything she owned in it. And the most feared man in Seoul on his knees on the tiles in a suit, he had killed a man in that morning. He did not defend himself. He never had. That was his whole life. He said, "Do not go to the airport. Go to Han. He is at the south gate." She said, "Was that your voice?" And he said, "Yes." That is all he gave her. One word, the truth, and no explanation. She walked out at 7 in the evening. The light was on over the back stairs. Uncle Nam took the house before the funeral. He did it properly, the way a man does who has been imagining it for years. He stood in the main hall and spoke about continuity and about the chairman's wishes and about a boy who had lost his way, and every man in that room who had spent 40 years being told that loyalty was the only law looked at the oldest loyal man they knew and decided he must be right. By the end of the second day, Uncle Nam had the house, the accounts, the men, and the name. And on the second day, he did the arithmetic that men like him always do. A witness alone is a problem you solve. A witness with a mother is not a witness. She's a negotiation. He sent 4 men to Accra. Choi Jean found out at 9 in the morning. He was in a rented apartment above a laundry in a part of Seoul his father would not have driven through, with no staff, no phone that worked, and a bag he had not unpacked. Han came up the stairs and stood in the doorway and said one sentence. 4 of them. They flew last night. Accra. Choi Jean stood at that window for 11 seconds. I want you to understand what he had left at that moment because it matters. He had nothing, not one thing. Every account had been closed on him inside 48 hours. Every man who had ever taken his call was in that house calling another man sir. He was a person with a surname and no house behind it. And in his world that is not a man, that is a target with a memory. He had one asset left, and it was the worst one, and he had been raised his entire life to understand exactly what it was worth. The legitimate side, the shipping company, for buildings on the river, the permits, the name over the door that his father had spent 40 years turning from something dirty into something a bank would lend to. The one clean thing the Choi family had ever built, the thing the whole bloody business had been for. It was in his name, not the family's. His. The chairman had put it there 3 years earlier, so that whatever happened to the rest of it, the clean part would survive. That was the inheritance. That was the point of everything his father had ever done. He traded it before lunch. Yang had wanted the river frontage for 9 years and hated Uncle Nam more than he hated the Choi family, which in that city counted as a friendship. He came to a room above a laundry personally, which tells you what he thought he was buying. He read the transfer papers twice. "You are giving me all of it." "Yes." "For what?" 6 men on a plane tonight and a phone number in Accra. Yang put the papers down and looked at him for a long moment, because he had known Choi Jin's father for 30 years, and he was trying to work out what the catch was. "Your father spent 40 years on this." "I know what he spent, and you are trading it for a maid." "Sign it," Choi Jin said. Han spoke then, and it was the only time in this story he ever did. "Sir, this is everything. I know what it is. She thinks you killed her sister. I know what she thinks. She is never going to know you did this." And Choi Jin said, "That is not what it is for." Han never asked him another question as long as he lived. Yang signed at 20 past 1 in the afternoon. 6 men were in the air by 10 that night. The 4 men Uncle Nam sent arrived in Accra on a Thursday and checked into a hotel near the airport, because that is what you do, and they went out on Friday morning to find a small house with a blue gate on a road 2 hours north. They did not find it. They spent Friday and Saturday not finding it, and by Saturday night, the 2 who were still able to make phone calls understood that nobody in that country was going to help them, that the road they wanted did not appear to have a name anymore, and that somebody had spoken to somebody, and that they were not hunting in that place, they were being hunted in it. What happened after that was arranged by a man who has not raised his voice one time in this entire story, and it was quiet, and it was final, and I am not going to dress it up for you. For men left Seoul. None of them came back. Mama Comfort never knew. She spent that week the way she spent every week. She cooked. She sat with a neighbor. She went to church on Sunday and prayed for both her daughters by name, the one she had lost and the one who was working somewhere cold. And she came home and put the kettle on. There were 2 men on her road that entire week that she never saw, and they were still there a month later, and they were paid out of the last money Choi Jin had in the world. So here is what he had, that Sunday night in an empty apartment above a laundry. No house, no name, no father, no business. A woman in a different country who believed he had drowned her sister, and who he had no way to contact, and no intention of contacting, because what exactly was he going to say? He could not tell her what he had spent. He could not tell her about the phone call in the sunroom. He could not stand in front of her and ask to be believed. He had never once in his life explained himself to anybody. It was the only thing he did not know how to do. He did a terrible thing that week. He did it for somebody who thought he was a murderer, who was never going to find out, and who he did not expect to see again for the rest of his life. And if something in you went quiet with relief when I told you those 4 men never reached that road, then you understand exactly what kind of story this is and exactly what kind of man she had fallen in love with. Both things are true. They stay true. He is the man who put the light on over the back stairs, and he's the man who emptied a bank account to make 4 people disappear, and there is no version of this where you get one without the other. She was going to have to decide whether she could live with that. She decided in 11 days. Because the thing that finished Uncle Nam was not in that mansion. It never had been. Sandra Darko had posted a parcel to her mother on the first Sunday of every month since she was 19 years old. Rice, painkillers, a scarf, whatever she had. And on her 4th Sunday in that house, she had wrapped a jar in a piece of folded paper she pulled out of the recycling in the East Wing, because it was thick and it was there and she was in a hurry, and she had posted it to Accra without ever once looking at it. Mama Comfort kept everything her daughters sent her. In a tin, under the bed, the way mothers do. It was a page from Shipping Manifest, and on the back of it, in Uncle Nam's handwriting, was a set of dates and a number for a boat that had never carried what it said it carried, and one line at the bottom saying that the Ghanaian girl in the East Wing had seen it. She had carried the proof out of that house in her own hands, without knowing, in a parcel to her mother. She came back through that gate 11 days later. She walked into a room with 19 men in it, in a gray house uniform she no longer had any right to wear, holding a photocopy and a phone with her mother on the line, and she put both on the table in front of a man who had killed her sister and had been calling himself uncle for 40 years. And she said, out loud, in front of all of them, "My name is Sandra Darko." My sister's name was Josephine Darko. She was not nobody. She worked in this house for 2 years, and she wrote home every Sunday. And this man drowned her for a piece of paper, and I have had that paper in my mother's house in Accra for 400 days. Nobody moved. Then she turned around and looked at the man standing by the window with his hands at his sides. The man who had let her walk out. The man who had never once in his life explained himself to anybody. And she said, Jean, just his name, the first time anyone in that house had ever used it. He looked up like she had touched him. Uncle Nam did not leave that house. Every man in that room had spent 40 years being told that loyalty was the only law, and they had just been shown, on paper, in his own handwriting, what he had actually been loyal to. He kept talking. He was still explaining when they took him out. He genuinely believed it, all the way to the end. That is what he was. The empire was gone. Choi Jean had traded it before breakfast on a Tuesday, and never asked for it back. What was left was a house, and a light on a set of back stairs, and 2 people standing in a kitchen who had run out of reasons not to be honest. She asked him why he did it. All 14 of them. All those women. And he told her he had told himself it was mercy. She made him say the true word. She stood in that kitchen, and she would not let him leave until he said it. And eventually, quietly, a man who had ordered deaths without blinking said out loud that he had been a coward, and that being frightened of a war was not a reason to make 14 women believe they were worthless, and that he was sorry. And then Sora told her about the Thursdays. They were sitting on the back step in April, the 2 of them, and Sora said it the way you say a thing you've been carrying for a year and a half. The man stopped coming. That was all Sandra had ever known. She had gone to the East Wing office with a cup of tea at 11 at night, and after that, the man simply did not come on Thursdays anymore, and Sora started using the back stairs, and the whole thing sank under everything else that happened that year. He had not stopped coming. Sandra sat on that step and did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was very simple. A sunroom, a Thursday afternoon, a permit conversation and a phone against his ear, and a second call coming in. For seconds of listening. 3 words in the voice he would use to confirm a lunch order. Yes, do it. A brass clock in the corridor reading 4:20. A man in the river near the fish market. A 19-year-old girl who never had to be afraid of a staircase again, and who was never told why. The recording Uncle Nam played in that hall to a room full of grieving men. The 3 words that made her pack a bag in 11 minutes. The 3 words that made her believe, all the way down in her stomach, that she had been loved by the man who drowned her sister. That was it. That was the call. She had listened to him protect Sora and heard her sister's murder. Sandra went back into that house and found him and asked him why he had not told her. In the kitchen, on the day she left, when she stood there with a bag in her hand and asked him if it was his voice, and he said yes, 1 word, and let her walk out of his life. And Choi Jean looked at her and said, "Because it was not mine to tell you." That is the whole man, right there in 9 words. He would rather she believed he was a murderer than tell her a thing a 19-year-old girl had told him in confidence. She did not shout at him. She wanted to. She put both hands flat on his chest and stood there with her forehead against him for a long time, and neither of them said anything else about it, then or ever. He found the 14 women. Every one. It took him 2 years. 4 countries, and a letter to each one in his own handwriting saying the same thing, that everything he had ever said to her was a lie he told to keep her breathing, and that he had been wrong to tell it, and that he was sorry. 11 of them wrote back. Now let me tell you how they lived, because you have earned this. The first thing is small. It is the first meal. 6 weeks after everything, in a kitchen at 9 at night, he cooked, badly, and put a plate down in front of her and sat down opposite with his own, and she looked at that plate for a long time. She had not eaten in front of another person in 6 years. She picked up the spoon. Her hand shook. He did not say 1 word about it. He did not encourage her, and he did not look away, and he did not make a moment. He just ate his own food and let her be a woman having dinner. She finished the whole plate. Then she put her head down on that kitchen table and cried, and he put his hand flat on her back and left it there, and that is the entire scene. That is all that happened. And that was the night she stopped being afraid of him. The second thing was Josephine. The death record in Seoul said a Ghanaian national had left the country in March of that year, and the file was closed. It took 9 months and more money than a house to correct 1 page. But it was corrected. Cause of death, real. Name spelled right. Date, true. They flew her home. There is a stone outside a town 2 hours north of Accra with her name cut into it, and her real dates underneath. And the first Sunday it stood there, her mother sat down on the ground beside it, and talked to her for 2 hours about nothing at all, about neighbors and prices and rain, the way you talk to somebody who has finally come home. The third thing, Mama Comfort tried to refuse. The house with the blue gate came down, and a real one went up in its place for bedrooms, water that runs, a courtyard with a wall for shade. She walked through those rooms touching the door frames, and she could not get her breath, and she asked Sandra, in Choi, whether this was really theirs, and Sandra said, "Yes, Mama, it is yours." The fourth thing happened at 7 in the evening in Seoul, on the back stairs, under a bulb. He had changed himself at midnight in another life. He did not kneel. He had knelt to her once already, and they both knew what it had cost. He just stopped on the landing under that light, and said, "The stairs are steep." And she started laughing and crying at the same time, because it was the first thing he had ever given her, and she had spent 400 days pretending not to know what it meant. She said yes before he finished asking. Here is the last one. A Sunday, 6 years later, in a house outside Accra, with the doors open. There are 2 languages in that kitchen, and neither one is winning. Mama Comfort is at the stove being told by a Korean grandmother that she is using too much oil in a language she does not speak, and she is arguing back in Choi, and both of them are enjoying themselves enormously. There is a blue-rimmed enamel bowl on the counter. It is old. It came from a photograph taken outside a house in Accra a long time ago, of 2 sisters laughing. And there is a girl, 4 years old, loud, with a gap coming in her front teeth, running through the courtyard with a spoon in her hand, and her name is Josephine. Her father is at the table with his sleeves rolled up. He is still the stillest man in any room he walks into. Men who knew what he was do not come to that house. But his hand goes out when that child runs past, automatically, to catch her, and he does not look up when he does it. And across the kitchen, a woman who was once called the new girl looks over at him with her hands in a bowl of rice. And he looks back. That is all. They do not say anything. 6 years, 411 days, 1 house, 2 graves, and a light on a set of stairs, all held inside one look across an ordinary kitchen on an ordinary Sunday. She eats at that table every day of her life now, where everyone can see her. He never once made a speech about her. He never told her she was beautiful in front of a room full of people. He changed a light bulb at midnight so she would not fall down the stairs in the dark, and he never mentioned it. And that is how she knew. That is how you always know. So tell me in the comments, what did this one do to you? Who were you thinking about during the light on the stairs? And which moment between them is the one you are going to carry around with you for the rest of today? I'm glad you stayed. That is all any of us are ever really asking anyone to do. This has been Afro Korean Stories Empire, where love, the real kind, the kind that survives everything, is always, always worth the wait.